Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys stopping by very much. As you guys do know, we have the 2021 Grand Chess Tour, Paris, Rapid and Blitz. So we are in the portion where they're playing 3 games per day. So I'm going to really try very hard to get these 3 games in, but I figured I'd start at round 2. And it is Wesley versus Richárd Rapport from Hungary. So for all of my people in the Philippines, magandang umaga, kamusta na? Mabuhay, ingat lagi, mabuting pagbati, almasal tayo. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ing aking ma video. Masaya kong mukita kang muli. Appreciate you guys very much. For anybody who is coming from Hungary, hello to you. And I just learned it right now. Kusanem. Thank you very much for coming and stopping by real quick. And as of course, for anybody who's in Paris, merci beaucoup, mon ami, or mes amis. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we got for the game. Bam, so we got D4. I forgot to cut the volume up like normal. Bam. All right, so knight comes to F6. We got C4, E6. And those of you guys that watch my videos, this should be very familiar looking to you. There's so many different possibilities. I won't go into all of them, but, you know, for those of you that have seen my stuff before, you know, there's like 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 different ways you can go about playing this position. But we do see knight coming to C3. We got bishop to B4, E3, and then we have C5. So we have the Nimzo Indian defense, the Hubner variation. So, you know, this C5 move here, you know, there's a couple different things about it. You know, number one, you know, white has, you know, a pretty nice little pawn center established. So, you know, black is trying to chip away at it. But it is also trying to support his bishop a little bit. You know, because, of course, you know, if queen came here or something like that, you know, you're not going to be able to take all of that stuff. So, you know, it's just multi-purposeful. Also, you know, the black is trying to get this knight in behind the pawn instead of blocking its own pawn in. So it's always pretty useful. So we do see bishop coming to D3. We got knight to C6, knight to E2, pawn takes D4, pawn takes D4, and then we do have D5. So, you know, black is just being very super hyper aggressive with it. You know, they're trying to, like, at every opportunity just chip away at white's, you know, established pawn center. So that is always what you want to do, because, you know, don't just, like, let your opponent just beat you. You know, put up a fight at least, you know. So we got pawn takes D5, knight takes D5. We see castles by white. And then we do see knight coming to F6 by black. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't agree with this move. You know, this, you know, the knight is very, very well placed on D5. So I just didn't really understand moving it back to F6. You know, so actually castles here was fine. You know, because after knight takes D5, you do see pawn takes D5. And I mean, you have a little bit for black. I mean, you can always back this bishop up. Back this bishop up like this. You know, just kind of put a little bit of pressure on this pawn. You can also bring the queen over here, put a little bit more pressure. So, I mean, I feel like, you know, leaving knight there was a little bit better. You know, whenever you develop your pieces, if you've gotten your piece to a nice square, you know, just leave it there. Like, don't move it, you know, unless there's some type of tactic or something behind it. So, you know, we did see knight coming to F6, and then we saw bishop down to C2 because, you know, of course, now at this point, you know, we are worried about the attack on this pawn. Which, you know, bishop to E3 was possible as well. Probably not as good. We see castles by black. We see A3. Bishop takes C3. Pawn takes C3. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is E5. You know, as you've seen the entire game, black has just like relentlessly just attack white's center. And as you can see, you know, black doesn't really have a lot of central pawns. So, you know, they're trying to, you know, degrade white structure as much as possible. Now, backing up in this position, we have seen queen to A5 before, and that was in 2019. So we just have a little variation with E5 here. Bishop comes to G5. So we see pawn takes D4, knight takes D4, knight takes D4, pawn takes D4. And as you guys can see, you know, white has a very strong position because they do have a completely passed pawn. You know, they don't have any C or E pawns that are contesting this pawn. So if you're not careful, this pawn will get pushed all the way to the end of the board and cause some real havoc. So we see H6 by black. Bishop comes back to H4. We want to maintain that pin. Rook comes to E8. We see queen to d3 because why not threaten checkmate? You know, of course, if the bishop was able to take here, you know, queen taking back. I mean, that wouldn't be checkmate, it'd be check. Moving king over, then you probably see, you know, the rook swinging over to cut off this file. And then you would be having some real issues. We got bishop to d7. We see d5 starting to go ahead and push the pawn here. We got rook to c8. We got d6, g5. Bishop comes down to g3. We see knight coming down to e4. Rook a to e1. We see rook to c3. And we see queen to d1. And then we see knight taking g3, pawn taking g3, rook taking e1, and rook taking e1. And I will say this about the situation. This is not the position that, as black, you want to trade down. You know, normally when, you know, if you look at it, the material is equal. You know, you guys have the same amount of pieces, but the major issue that black has in the position is this pawn here on d6. Trading down allows, you know, you to just kind of, you know, push your advantage a little bit further. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you're going to be moving pieces out of the way. You're going to be trading off defenders. You know, right now you have this bishop and this queen kind of blockading the pawn. So you're in a very defensive position. So, you know, the trading off pieces doesn't really help your defense of the position. So we got bishop over to e6. We see queen to d2, you know, placing a little attack on this rook over here. We do see rook takes a3. We got rook to d1, just making this like a super thorn. We see bishop back to d7. We got queen to b4. And this is a really like instructive move because you are noticing that this rook is undefended and this pawn is also, you know, under attack. So you kind of have to, you know, work a little bit of magic with this though, because the rook is going to come down here and attack this bishop. But we do see queen to b3, and that finally knocks the rook to a5, and then we now can take the pawn on b7. So we are just doing extremely well here for white. We see king coming down to g7. We see rook over to e1. We see rook to c5. Queen comes back to e4. You know, there is really no way now to defend against, you know, the placement of the queen on h7. We see queen coming down to f6. We see queen to h7 with check. King comes back to f8. And then we have a really, like, it seems almost obvious to make this move in this position is actually rook to e7. Now, I will say the thing that doesn't really make it obvious is the fact that, you know, you kind of have your bishop down here. You know, if you're going to be moving your queen around, this bishop is going to be suspect. But, you know, this is just a very strong move. Rook to e7. It is like, you know, the pig on the 7th, just like times 10. And so, you know, you have a couple of options in this position. We'll get to those in a minute. What we do see in the game is bishop to e8, just trying to add as much defense as possible to this square. And also, you know, of course, the bishop was attacked on this square. So we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to make a move and make like the most like insane crushing move for white, you know, go ahead and do so. See if you can find that move. Okay, cool. So I don't think this is the easiest move to see. You know, I think it's it takes a considerable amount of calculation. The move is actually bishop to g6. And like I said, I think that it's really hard to find this move because it just kind of seems like it throws your bishop away. But if you're calculating a little bit into the position, you will see why bishop to g6 is like the most crushing, insane move. It is actually after bishop to g6 that Richárd Rapport does resign the game. And it is because basically all possibilities lead to, like, you know, you just being very sad. So if we look at after bishop to g6, what the computer really wants you to play, and this is like, I mean, this is horribly losing still, but it's like your only like last chance to try to do something. And it is rook to c8, just to come back and try to defend. You absolutely do not want to take the bishop, and we'll get into that in a second. But you will see queen takes h6 with check. Queen would come to g7. You see queen taking g7, king taking g7. You see bishop down to f5, throwing a counterattack on this rook, in which, of course, you're probably going to go rook to c1 with check. King would come up to h2, bishop down to b5, and then you would see bishop to d3. And the unfortunate thing about the situation is bishop to d3 is wanting you to take this bishop so that you can just successfully push this pawn home. And in the computer's opinion, this is the best possible scenario that's going to occur. If we get back to the position that we had after bishop to g6, if you did so happen to want to take queen takes g6, this is going to be a very interesting combination. After queen to h8 would check, queen would come back and it would defend. So to throw a nice little in-betweener in there, before you do this nice tactic, you would actually be taking queen takes h6 with check, forcing the queen down to g7 to defend. And it would be then that you would take rook takes e8 with check, forcing the king over, and then you would be winning the queen. It's just a little bit nicer than after this. You can always do it here, which, you know, you would end up still being a very completely won position, but you would not have that extra pawn. So if you ever have a chance to grab some extra material real quick before you go into a trade, do so. Now, coming back to after we saw rook up to e7, it was actually more beneficial to sack the exchange and go rook takes c2. And then after queen takes c2, you got queen taking d6, and then you have rook down to e1. Now, you are down in exchange, but you do have a pawn, and it's possible to push this pawn here and then kind of latch the bishop on over there on b5, and you have at least some resistance. So this was something that was like, you had to go into this at this point. But, you know, like I said, once bishop to g6 showed up on the board, there was literally nothing to have to be done. And the really nice thing about this move is it is adding a lot of pressure to f7, but the main thing that it's doing is it is cutting off the queen's defense of this h6 pawn and allowing a check to be placed on the board. So that is like very important in this position, because of course, as you guys know, you couldn't have just took here, you know, before that. So that is that game. So for all of my people in the Philippines, I've been kind of working on them. I just have a few more, I think, to go until I can pretty much say all the good mornings and be, you know, moving back to Tagalog. But maayong buntag, mayad na agahan, naibag na bigat, masanto siya kabosan, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na uma, kapian kapu no dios. I have, this is where it gets tough, man. What is it? Spacing. Mayap a abak. And mayad na aga. I have mapia agay. Mapia kapapita. I have my big abukla. I have Maraja Abuntag, I think. Nabuntag. Yes. And then Maraya Mainat, Malpai Na Aga, and Kasanyangan Si Lub. So I got like 3 or 4 more, and then I'm like completely done. But I appreciate everybody stopping by very much, and I will see y'all next time. Actually, I got that in Tagalog. Where is that at? See you next time. See you later. I got that. Limited P, QRST. Maybe. Oh. Yes. Kita na long tayo mamaya. Got you. See you later.